This is the influences on bureaucracy. It's our third um, lecture on American bureaucracy. And so we're going to look at how do you get hired? What keeps you there? You might be very disappointed after you go through this lecture, but it is what it is. So how do you get to hire those people? Well, first and foremost, remember that 90% of all bureaucrats are appointed by virtue of some merit exam. Most of these positions require a college education, etc., etc. Many people, though, seek them because they're relatively safe. It's very difficult to get fired from them. So even if you're a mediocrity, you can make a really good government salary, which is why lots of people go after these types of jobs. There's a safety net, good benefits, good salary, perhaps not as good of a salary as there could be in the private sector, but then you don't have to worry about getting laid off, and we'll see why in a couple minutes. So, 90% of bureaucrats are appointed by virtue of some merit exam. However, there are ways around that. We see it in the private sector, we certainly see it in the public sector. You write a job description for an opening that describes basically the person you're going after, and only that person fits the written job qualifications that you're advertising for. That seems unfair, but it happens all the time. And that's part of that networking system that is so important in moving around the job market. Secondly, you can be hired temporarily. You put that person in place, and after that person works there for a couple years, they become the person who's going to get the job. They've proved their competence in doing so. The third way of getting a person in is to get that person a lower job, but give them responsibilities of the job that they actually want them in. And eventually that person will become the person that is going to get that job, simply because they've usually proven that they can do that job. It might be a modest level of expertise that they have to provide, but they do it. So the above practices all lead to charges that there's a buddy system that exists, that it's a good old boys network in effect. And I think there could probably be some merit to that. But the world works that way. It is what it is. Now, you apply for a job. And you're not like me, Mr. Jones, white male. So if you do apply for that government job and you served in the military and you're a woman and you're Hispanic, let's say, you all get bonus points. And it will be much easier to hire you than it will be to hire me, unless I know somebody and they provide the buddy system stuff that I could take advantage of. And then, once they get that job, it is extremely difficult to fire a civil service employee. There's an elaborate due process system in place, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but it overprotects the incompetent to the point where you cannot get rid of them. Look how difficult it is to get rid of bad teachers and bad administrators, in particular teachers. It's very elaborate. It's very time-consuming. And if we look at what's happened is, 14/100% of all federal employees have been fired in recent years. God, you could almost count those people on your both hands. There really are that few in number of incompetent people that once they get on the job, you realize they can't do it, and then you don't get rid of them because you find the process too difficult. But apparently that's happening. If we look at just the State Department, in 17 years, 5 State Department employees were fired. 17 years. One every 3 years. It's amazing. It's just amazing. So what are the effects of these types of things? Well, first and foremost, many bureaucrats have a loyal or agency point of view. It's the agency that hired them. They therefore take on the attributes of that agency. They go, as we say, native. And that doesn't mean that they, if the agency, or like it could mean that if the agency has, every Friday you don't have to wear a suit and tie. It's relaxed day, relaxed clothes day. Well, that is going native in essence, but it's more all about how the agency works, the expected behavior of the employees of that agency. And so not only do they have the loyal or agency point of view, but they also provide for continuity in that type of agency behavior. Every agency has a different culture. For instance, the culture at Eastside is very different from the culture that they're trying to destroy at Highland because, hey, we're innovative and we really care about you. I'm not saying that teachers at Eastside don't care about their kids, but you know how we are here. But that's the kind of culture that's developed over years that they're trying to destroy. Third, there's certainly among these people an expertise in policies and procedures that develop. And that's one of the reasons you stay with your agency. Going to another agency is like going from, Paris to France, England to France, and being expected to speak French right away. You have to learn how an agency works. So that means that there's not a lot of agency jumping among federal employees. If they start at state, they stay at state. If they start at labor, they stay at labor. And finally, agency managers stay there so long, and because there's very little turnover in employees, the agency managers have to work to cultivate the support of their subordinates because they know they're going to be there a long time. So those become kind of the expected behaviors of that bureaucracy that you're working for. Now, what are the personal attributes of bureaucrats? Well, lower and middle level bureaucrats are fairly representative of a broad cross-section of the American people on the basis of race, sex, religion, etc. They look like us. And so they are more representative. You could say they are more representative than Congress is. And that would be a true statement. On the other hand, though, upper level bureaucrats are unrepresentative. They're mostly middle-aged white males with college degrees from an advantaged background. Hey, they came from Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Princeton, Penn. Look at the people that the current president has brought in. Same thing with Bush. Same thing with Clinton. And so consequently, if we look at the criticism, the left tends to think that upper-level bureaucrats defend class privileges, and therefore they have a conservative bias. Could be true. Definitely could be true. The right, on the other hand, believes that upper-level bureaucrats are trained by liberal faculty at elite colleges and therefore have a liberal bias. And that's probably true too. And we do know that surveys reveal that bureaucrats tend to be more liberal than the general public at large. Hence, they like big government. It gives them more job security. It also gives them more power. We do know that bureaucrats who work in activist agencies, like the EPA, like the FTC, like the SEC, tend to be more liberal than those who work in more traditional agencies like Justice, Defense, and Treasury. Hence, the difference in cultures that develop at those agencies. Now, surprisingly enough, only about 10% of federal employees live in the District of Columbia area. That means they live in D.C., they live in Northern Virginia, they live in Western Maryland. It just so happens at the same time that some of the wealthiest counties, in fact, I think the wealthiest county in the United States, is one of those counties in Northern Virginia. They're full of well-paid, highly paid federal employees. Now, we do know that also about 30% of all workers who work for the federal government work in defense, not only in Washington at the Pentagon, but throughout the United States because the military is so big. Now, contrary to popular belief, less than 50% of all federal workers work in a welfare agency like Health and Human Services. And most of them are white-collar workers. They go to work, they don't get their hands dirty, except maybe the ink that comes off paper. They're not forest rangers. They're not other types of people who work outside. They are white-collar workers. So you might ask, if you get to this point, is there anything to constrain the power of these federal employees? Well, let me tell you, there is. There are some legal constraints. First and foremost, there's the Freedom of Information Act. Secondly, there's the Hatch Act, which limits the political activities of bureaucrats. Now, to go back to the Freedom of Information Act just for a second, that means that any information, for the most part, that a bureaucrat has on you can be obtained by you, so you know what has been collected. The Hatch Act says you cannot go to work and do political work at work on behalf of a candidate while you're doing your job. It's a conflict of interest. They can fire you. Third, affirmative action hiring guidelines. This is about the only place that affirmative action guidelines exist anymore. The states certainly have abandoned them. And finally, the environmental impact report. It requires federal employees to justify the effect that federal projects will have on the environment of the area that they want to build or develop or whatever. And there are some organizational constraints. The sheer size of agencies makes it difficult for bureaucrats to take action. And red tape, the thing that we saw in the excerpts from Brazil in the cartoon, also inhibits actions by bureaucrats. But perhaps more than anything else, there's the lack of monetary incentives and the presence of various disincentives, which inhibits bureaucrats from taking bold action. Why take bold action when all it can do, or all it will do, is cause you grief? There's no incentives to be innovative. And that's really sad. There needs to be those kind of things in place. We need to reward innovation and clear thinking, but we don't. And so what happens is you get organizations in which the mantra is, don't rock the boat. Don't make waves. Why? In that way, just like with teaching, you simply protect the mediocrity that exists. So that's the end of our look at the behavior of bureaucracies. Our fourth lecture will be called Controlling the Bureaucracy. How do we rein in all those well-paid bureaucrats? Until next time, Mr. Jones signing off.